Welcome to the Beau Show. You may remember that Donald Trump would always use the catchphrase, America first, as he tried to prioritize the interest of Americans over the world. This manifests itself in many different ways. One challenging but big focus of this strategy was to balance the scales with China, especially on the issue of trade. It was well known that China had stolen a lot of America's ingenuity through intellectual property theft. In order to do business with Chinese companies, many times there would be a mandatory sharing of IP, wherein the Chinese company could then rip off the proprietary design or creativity. Another way Trump prioritized America first was through immigration, by ensuring that Mexico did a better job with its flow of traffic and gang and drug activity. Building the wall and some of the immigration policies reduced an influx of traffic on our southern border. And he cracked down on gangs, such as El Salvador's notorious MS-13 gang, where scores of gang members were arrested across the United States. He also withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, which was nothing but a lip service virtue signal that only benefited polluting countries such as China and India, who made no actionable commitments to reducing their fossil fuels, when all the other countries reduced theirs. Also, in terms of NATO, Trump required NATO countries to pony up and pay their fair share for the U.S. defending them. No one had really ever challenged NATO countries to contribute more, because they just assumed the United States would always do the most. But we were just not getting our return on investment. Being the world's policeman means that the U.S. uses taxpayer dollars to defend the world and smaller nations against aggression. The U.S. has poured billions of dollars into countries that would squander that money, from Haiti to Central America to Ukraine. This happened with both Republican and Democrat presidents. But Trump came in and did a full reevaluation of where our money was going. And just like evaluating a business's overhead, he throttled that back. And people who'd been in the federal government for decades were aghast that he could request this, let alone actually accomplish it. When you look back at the Trump economy, there is no debate that it flourished. Unemployment, particularly among minorities, hit a 50-year low. The economy's rising tide lifted all boats. Gas prices were low, and Trump executed a military operation to take out Iranian General Soleimani, who had killed scores of American troops. And what did Iran do in return? Jack squat. They knew that they could not test Trump's military might. But now, in just 2 years, we have seen such a drastic change in philosophy. The Trumpian America First doctrine has transitioned to an America Last strategy, where we have returned to some of the previous globalist ideas. Today, I want to go through some of those policies so that you understand how significant these changes are. Many of them you can feel very viscerally and personally, such as high gas prices and inflation. And some are less obvious to you. I think it's also just as important to be presented with this information factually. Every day, I seem to run into people who are misinformed, and they repeat the same lies that someone else told them, usually from social media or the media itself. We know that the media covered up the Hunter Biden laptop story. Well, it gets worse than that, and has a direct effect upon Joe Biden's policy direction and how corrupt that can be. So first, let's take a look at energy, because that one is very, very palpable right now. Gas prices have been steadily rising from the moment Joe Biden took office. This was before Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Remember that Biden has blamed prices on everything from supply and demand to Vladimir Putin himself, as they try to get Putin's price hike to trend so that you will be brainwashed by this misinformation. Biden has also attacked oil and gas companies for trying to boost their profit at a time of national crisis. ExxonMobil said they invested $118 billion on new oil and gas supplies over the past 5 years, compared to a net income of $55 billion, resulting in an almost 50% increase in its U.S. production of oil during that period. So they issued a statement that said, quote, "We kept investing even during the pandemic, when we lost more than $20 billion and had to borrow more than $30 billion to maintain investment to increase capacity to be ready for the post-pandemic demand." Rather than Biden threatening gas companies, Exxon issued this advice, quote, "In the short term, the U.S. government could enact measures often used in emergencies following hurricanes or other supply disruptions, such as waivers of Jones Act provisions and some fuel specifications to increase supplies. And then in the longer term, government can promote investment through clear and consistent policy that supports U.S. resource development, such as regular and predictable lease sales, as well as streamlined regulatory approval and support for infrastructure, such as pipelines," unquote. Remember that Biden shut down the Keystone XL pipeline right away, and with limited supply and drilling, it sets us up for this disaster. Then, because we imported oil from Russia, it puts us in a bad situation when they invaded Ukraine. So now we have screwed ourselves both at home and abroad. Biden tweeted at oil and gas companies by saying the following: "My message to the companies running gas stations and setting prices at the pump is simple. This is a time of war and global peril. Bring down the price you are charging at the pump to reflect the cost you're paying for the product, and do it now." Well, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association fired back in a very sardonic way, tweeting the following: "Working on it, Mr. President. In the meantime, have a happy 4th, and please make sure the White House intern who posted this tweet registers for Econ 101 for the fall semester." Now that's hilarious, but it's also true. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding this president has when it comes to gas prices. It is his administration's policies that have put us in this situation. When you cut supply, abolish federal land grants, increase dependence on foreign oil, demand and prices are bound to go up. In addition to these disastrous policies meant to wean us off of oil, the Department of Energy in April sold 950,000 barrels of strategic petroleum reserve to Unipec America, the U.S. arm of China's largest trading company, Unipec, which is wholly owned by China Petrochemical Corporation, also known as Sinopec. Why in God's name is Biden selling almost 1 million barrels of oil from our strategic reserves to a Chinese-owned gas company at a time when gas is $5 a gallon? Does that make any sense to you? Our strategic reserves are at an all-time low, and Biden is selling oil to China. This is not just a dumb move, but it puts national security at risk. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted, "The Biden administration should not be sending our reserves, which we need for our country, to China. It is foolish and defies all common sense." Rubio has introduced a bill to ban all exports of oil to China. Reps Troy Nehls and Mike Loychik took it even one step further. They tweeted, "Well, while you are paying $5 a gallon at the pump and struggling to pay your electricity bill, Biden just sold 1 million barrels of our reserved oil to China so his family can make a buck. This is impeachable." Now let's look at the Hunter Biden connection. Hunter Biden set up the private equity firm BHR Partners, which contributed $1.5 billion to Sinopec in 2014. He still has investment in the firm, but is trying to unwind it, according to former press secretary Jen Psaki. The fact that Joe Biden's Energy Department would even consider selling some of our strategic oil reserves to a Chinese company is bad enough in and of itself. But a company directly propped up by his son Hunter? This is Burisma 2.0. Biden was VP at that time and pressured Ukraine to fire the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma. These things just don't make sense. Why would Biden award any contract to a foreign company when Americans are paying through the nose right now? But through subterfuge, he tells you it's the American gas company's fault and that Putin is responsible for it. This is a great example of America last. Nothing about these actions helps Americans. Certainly helps China, though. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm and her department have yet to answer for this. But we know now that Biden does this intentionally to get Americans off of oil and onto electric, for which lithium is mined from China. Everything about these policies gives the CCP a geopolitical edge. When it comes to inflation, there's a similar America last direction. In March of 2022, the Consumer Price Index hit an all-time high of 8.5%. However, even as Newsweek's fact-check team notes, inflation had been rising by 2.5% between September 2021 and February 2022, which sits among the widest fluctuations of the past 20 years. But yet he blames Putin. and only Putin, who didn't invade Ukraine until March. Professor Michel Garassi noted that while conflict in Ukraine had impacted inflation, the rises were far longer in the tooth, noting that near zero interest rates adopted by the Fed, along with generous stimulus packages and quantitative easing following the 2008 financial crash, played a role. The supply crisis caused by COVID-19, limiting the ability of businesses to restart after the pandemic, exacerbated the issue. The war in Ukraine was an add-on, and the EU sanctions on oil and gas were also causing prices to go up. So think about that for a moment. The shutdown of businesses was a policy decision. Trump never wanted that, but blue states continued that disastrous policy, some even to this day. And what the professor notes is that part of the problem started in the Obama presidency, during which Biden was VP. It started there, and then Biden made it worse, as he stepped into what you could call an Obama third term. Newsweek's team thus makes the conclusion that the notion that inflation is the result of a so-called Putin price hike is mostly false. Now you know you're being lied to. It harkens back to bad Obama policy and bad Biden policy. When you vote, you get what you pay for. America last. And just this whole push for globalism is also an America last decision. Obama tried to make America more Europeanized. And we all know that Europe has certainly been no icon of economic beauty. In fact, those European countries that are close to Russia and China are more reliant upon those nations, which subverts their national security and their economy.